here. Thank you, everybody, for uh, being here today. It is January 9th, 2024. Congratulations, everyone, on another trip around the sun. I hope everyone had a safe and fun holiday season, got to spend a lot of time with your favorite people. I certainly did. And so just as a reminder, this training is being recorded, so it will be posted on our YouTube site and on our website for rewatching later and for sharing with any colleagues that you feel may benefit from this information. Today's presentation is the ABCs of the NEMSIS 3.5 DUA being presented by my colleague Monet, who is the expert on this subject. So any questions that come today, please feel free to ask those. If you do have a question during the presentation, feel free to raise your hand and we will unmute you so that you can ask your question, or please use the chat function as part of Zoom. I'm sure you're very familiar with those. With that, I'll go ahead and turn the time over to Monet and you can go ahead and get started.
Thank you so much, Chris, for the introduction. I really appreciate the opening. Greetings, everyone. Can you hear me okay? Happy New Year, and thank you for being on the call with us today. As Chris mentioned, my name is Monet Iheanacho. I'm a business data analyst here at the NEMSIS Tech. And we'll go ahead and get started. All right. So the objective of the presentation today is to talk about the history of NEMSIS, what is a DUA, why we enter into the DUAs. I have invited some guest presenters, or at least one guest presenter, the value of relationships, the process for executing a DUA, and requests for assistance from the states. Dr. Clayman is the principal investigator for the NEMSIS project, and I have invited him to talk about the history of NEMSIS to set the foundation and set the tone for the discussion of the DUAs. The reason I chose Dr. Mann is because he tells one of the most compelling and compassionate stories about this project, and he is the lead of our agency or our organization here. So Dr. Mann, if you're on the call at this time, I turn the time over to you.
Right, thank you. Yeah, thanks for that introduction, Monet. I'm happy to join with folks. NEMSIS has been an important project to me and to those who have been associated with it for a number of years. Glad to give a little bit of a history. My perception of the history is probably a little jaded in that it's how I became familiar with the impact and importance of NEMSIS. Clearly, for years prior to the 2000s, there had been a number of attempts to standardize the way that EMS data was collected across the country. There had been a number of research studies and even some public press on differences that existed in how EMS was measuring response time to cardiac arrest in Seattle, Washington versus LA, California. And it was distressing, and there were many efforts to try to provide some type of a standard dictionary that would kind of standardize the approach to data collection and patient care reports. And NHTSA had put out a data dictionary called version 1 that really had just collected dust, I think, and was sitting on the shelves of many fire agencies and EMS agencies. And I don't know if the data was being, the data standard was being implemented. For me, the turning point came. There was a group of investigators that were brought to New York 2 days before the 9/11 attacks on the Twin World Trade Center. those investigators were emergency medicine physicians and EMS physicians brought together for a study called the PAD trial, the Public Access Defibrillation Trial. That was the trial that led to the implementation of public access defibrillators in airports and in malls and in schools. They'd met there for just a biannual meeting to discuss the progress of the study. While that team was there, of course, 911 or the events of 9/11 occurred. I have just a couple of maybe slides to share. These are just personal slides. I don't know that anybody else has really seen those outside just my circle of friends and those that I work with. But this was after the event had happened, after the Twin Towers had fallen. The members of the PAD trial, the physicians, the New York City police came to us and confiscated 2 public buses and asked if we could go over and set up a triage center on the island. We went ahead and did that. This is the bus ride over. And as we arrived on the island, just some pictures out of the window of the bus that I took. We set up 2 kind of triage centers with the idea that there may be a number of patients that would be brought to these triage centers for stabilization before transport off the island. Anyway, long story short, this everyone was able to get themselves home. About 7 months after the events in New York, there was a congressional hearing that was held. And many of the people who'd been involved in this setting up these triage centers and being on the island there for a week were brought together in this meeting with congressional, mostly aides were in the room, but they wanted to question the experts in trauma care and in pre-hospital care about what went right, what went wrong, what could be improved. In our ability to respond to this type of a disaster in the country. And many of the questions went something like this. If there had been many burn survivors that had come out of the Twin Towers collapse, could you tell us how many burn beds there are in this country and where they're located geographically? Another question was, many EMS resources were brought to bear onto the island during the attack. How many EMS agencies are there in this country, and what resources do they have? Very simple questions about what Congress was hoping was a coordinated infrastructure of pre-hospital and trauma care across the country. And with each of these questions, it was incredibly telling that there were no answers. No one knew how many EMS agencies there were in this country, how many were trained in BLS, ALS, the number of trauma burn beds in the country and where they were located. There was no organization, no national effort to standardize what resources and characteristics of EMS care were available in this country. And for me, I think that was the tipping point with all of the kind of small efforts at kind of standardizing EMS care and providing standardized data across the country. I think this was the tipping point that shortly after that meeting, probably within a year, NEMSIS was formulated by Dr. Graves Mears and the National Association of EMS Physicians at the time, and was submitted and was funded. And so I think in large part, much of what we've accomplished in NEMSIS over many years since then, I think has been related to the idea that wow, there really was a need to standardize our care and allow us to evaluate our ability to respond to emergencies.
Thank you so much. I appreciate your time sharing that story again, Dr. Mann. All right. let's move along. So the frequently asked questions about data use agreements is, what is a data use agreement? The data use agreement is a formal agreement used when there's an exchange of the research data. It governs the terms and the conditions that's associated with the transfer between the provider of the data, which is the states and the territories in the District of Columbia, and the recipients, which is the NEMSIS TAC, the University of Utah, and NHTSA's Office of EMS. Why do we need the DUA? The DUA is required under the privacy rule. Data security is very important to the University of Utah, which houses the NEMSIS TAC, and it's crucial to establish effective provisions in order to avoid any conflicts or misunderstandings about how the data will be utilized. Who initiates the DUA? The NEMSIS TAC initiates the DUA on behalf of NHTSA's Office of EMS, which is requesting the updated 3.5 DUAs for the data submissions. This is a statement that I use often in the NEMSIS monthly report. The 3.5 DUA was prepared by the University of Utah's privacy office. It was reviewed by one of the top EMS legal firms here in the U.S., which is Page, Wolfberg, and Wirth, and it's approved by the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, also known as NHTSA. I have invited my project manager, Mr. Eric Cheney from NHTSA's Office EMS, who is responsible for the NEMSIS project, to share a few words about NHTSA's authority to enter into the data use agreements. Eric, are you on the call? Chris, can you unmute Mr. Cheney, please?
Can you hear me now, Monet?
Yes, sir. Thank you so much.
Okay. I can't apologize. I can't share my camera either, Chris. But that's okay. The picture is a lot better. I had less gray hair then. So thank you, Monet, for the opportunity, and for those of you joining, thank you very much for joining the call. The data use agreements, in short, set the boundaries for how your data is used. And I'll take a step back, like Clay said, and give you just a perspective that you may not hear quite often. So the data that you provide is collected through NEMSIS as part of a contract that the U.S. Department of Transportation has with the University of Utah. So in short, the University of Utah is under a federal contract, which means they are tied to all the federal contracting rules, the same as if we were building the Joint Strike Fighter. What that means is that the TAC must function to all the federal requirements and Clay cannot make decisions unilaterally on behalf of NEMSIS. He cannot expend resources that we haven't approved or initiate projects that we haven't approved. So within the Department of Transportation, we have this formal process that at times is even unbelievable to us for doing a contract. And that contract basically has a contracting officer who is nothing to EMS. This individual deals with contracts all day long. It could be building bridges and interchanges on interstates. One of them just happens to be NEMSIS. We have a contracting officer representative who's in the Office of EMS, and that's Dave Bryson, who does a fantastic job managing the money, managing the procurement process, the ongoing contracting process, and the addition of funding, the additional projects, and so forth. Then I serve as the project manager for NEMSIS, which means I work with all of the non-governmental organizations. The NEMSIS is a great example, NREMT and any others, as well as work with the data managers and the folks on this call. So Jeremy Kinsman also works with all of you on many projects and is fulfilling some of the roles as what they call the ACOR, the alternate contracting officer representative, the person supporting Dave Bryson. I tell you all that because it's very important that you understand that when we take this data, we have to follow the guidelines established by the federal government the same way they would census data, the same way they would data for the IRS for your taxes. All of the rules for security and privacy that apply to them apply to you as well. For those of you that were on our calls with ONC and talking about data sharing with the hospitals and HIEs and how that all plays out, all of that has a component of these data use agreements in place. So I want to make sure that everybody understands that part of the process. But really, when it comes down to how we see it, Monet, I look at this as DOT are the stewards of this data that you all graciously, voluntarily provide, because the National Association of State EMS Officials years ago decided that one data standard would be great for the country and laid out this process. So that's why we take them very serious. We have people that ask for data outside the scope of those data use agreements, I will say at least weekly. We will not give out that data. We do not give out that data. We make sure that we guard those data use agreements as securely as we would, your clearance information in the government. So I'll stop there. If there's any questions about those, I am happy to address them. But please realize that when we sign off on those, or when you sign off on those with the University of Utah, the university is doing that as a representative of the federal government, and therefore is required to meet all of the process, all of the procedures, all the security requirements, and all the privacy requirements as any other data system in the government.
Thank you so much, Mr. Cheney. I appreciate you being on the call today. All right. Under the version 3 standard, we collected data in versions 3.1, versions 3.2, 3.4, and we did it once before. We can certainly do it again. You all remember when the states, the map on the NEMSIS website went green, and that was a result of 54 states and territories and the District of Columbia agreeing to the terms of the 3.4 data use agreement. NEMSIS, the current NEMSIS data use agreement, meets the regulatory requirements on the HIPAA for the content of a DUA. The NEMSIS tag, as well as NHTSA, contracted with Page, Wolfberg, and Wirth to provide a thorough review of all the HIPAA laws, and they provided confirmation that the NEMSIS DUA meets the regulatory guidelines. For this reason, we encourage states to use the current 3.5 data use agreement for the submission of the 3.5 data. Next, I want to talk a little bit about the power of relationships. And I want to say a thank you to Dr. Mike Dean, who's the former data steward for the NEMSIS DUAs at the Data Coordinating Center, which we call the DCC. And here's a little paragraph about Dr. Dean's various roles that he served here at the DCC. What I want to mention is that when I first came to work at the TAC several years ago, there was a very time-consuming process to implement the data use agreements. Average time was about 2 to 3 months. I literally walked the data use agreements from various department chairs in their offices across campus to wait for signatures. Then I would mail or scan those documents to the various states and wait again for signatures. After some time and becoming familiar with the language in the data use agreements, I implemented efficiencies and created a process with the Privacy Compliance Office and Dr. Dean's internal review team that allow for a quicker turnaround time with the states and with the university signatures. And I'm very proud to say that when all parties are aligned, there are trusted relationships with key individuals, we have successfully executed DUAs within 1 business day. I learned that Dr. Dean is retiring in June of 2024 this year. And with that transition, or with his departure, with his retirement, there is a transition in place. The new data steward is Dr. Jamie Dwyer. Now, Dr. Dwyer was recent. He was introduced to the NEMSIS TAC team in June of 2022. And I was informed that he not only is the new data steward, but he is the new sheriff in town, and he has a new process that we must follow. All DUA work must go through his office, but first they must go through the Office of Sponsored Projects for a legal review. Which brings me to my new colleague, Ms. Miriam Allen. I will now be collaborating with Ms. Allen to implement a seamless process so that we can execute the DUAs in a timely manner. And I have also invited her on the call today to briefly say hello. Ms. Allen, are you on the call?
Yep, I'm here. Good morning, everybody.
Okay. Would you like to say anything additional or add anything that I have missed out about the process that we're implementing?
No, so far, everything's been going very smoothly, and you're great to work with, Monet. I'm new to the NEMSIS project, although I work with many of the Data Coordinating Center other projects that they have. So yes, I highly support everything that we're doing. I think it's a fabulous program. I'm really excited to be part of it. And if anybody has any questions when they're looking at that data use agreement off of the website, please feel free to reach out to me via email or phone call, and I'll do my best to get it addressed, or at least find somebody who can answer it for you. This is a really, really great project. Thank you for allowing me to work on it as well.
Thank you, Ms. Allen. Thank you for being on the call. Okay, I want to talk a little bit about how you find the data use agreement. So from the NEMSIS website, you'll go to the tab that says Using EMS Data, and then you'll scroll down to the 3rd tab that says State Data Use Agreements. Once you're on that page, you'll scroll down towards the bottom and you'll see the version 3 data use agreement. I also have included a QR code here for easy access to that document, as well as the actual address that's listed here in white on the slide. A couple of things that I want to mention about the data use agreement. We would ask the state managers to prep the DUA for signatures. That includes adding the date when you want the data use agreement to actually take effect, and then adding the specific name of your EMS agency. This provides a really quick way for me to open up the document and for there to be a clear identification of which state has entered this data use agreement. The data use agreement is simply one of the most complete data use agreements that I've seen. Typically, when I'm looking and reviewing the data use agreements from various states, some of the data use agreements can be 40 pages or more in length. Our data use agreement, the substance and terminology and the general provisions are on pages 1 through 5. Page 6 starts the signature page, and this is the goal, to acquire those signatures. The other important aspect of the data use agreement is to review the appendix. This appendix includes the requisite national elements that have been modified slightly from the version 3.4 and previous standards. This includes the new elements that we're asking the states to submit to the NEMSIS TAC. Executing the DUA is a simple process. We request that your state EMS director or legal counsel review the data use agreement. If they feel that the terms and conditions are agreeable, then sign the document and send it back to us. Send it back to me specifically at this email address. If there is an inclusion of state-specific language, which is what we have seen most recently, then we need this review to be sent to Ms. Miriam Allen's office at the OSP. And then you would also copy me on the document. Now, when there are additional substantive modifications, the NEMSIS TAC will work with the University of Utah's General Counsel and the Privacy Compliance Office to work directly with the state legal teams to create a common goal and try to work through those changes and execute the DUA. I also want to talk about why executing the DUA is helpful. It's my opinion that NHTSA has made much more grant funding available to states than I have seen in past years. Standardization of the data makes it easier to apply for the various fundings and to complete the various annual certifications and various things that you need to complete at the state level as it relates to the NEMSIS standard and the NEMSIS data. My mother always said to say please and thank you. And so at this time, I would love to ask for the assistance of the state data managers and the directors, the state privacy compliance officers, and request your help to implement and execute the new 3.5 DUAs this year. I can email the state managers directly to inquire about the best approach, and we desire to work closely with you to complete this process. This concludes my presentation, and I would like to ask if there are any questions. I see something in the chat. I'm going to go ahead and take a peek at that. My colleagues have added the information, the link to the DUA on the website in the chat. If you have any questions at this time, you can enter those in the chat. We do not have any of the legal experts from PWW or from the University of Utah on the call at this time. However, I have been in communication with them, and they have advised me to send any complex questions directly to their office. Are there any questions? Okay, that concludes my presentation. I thank you all for being here today. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to us, and we will certainly respond in a very timely manner. I do have at least 7 DUA documents in process at this time. So thank you for your patience, and we will get those completed as soon as possible. Yes, there is a question in the chat about sending those directly to me. Yes, if you could send any questions directly to me, I will forward those questions and get the appropriate response back to you. Thank you all for being here. Have a great rest of your day. If you also have any additional comments for public trainings in this 2024 calendar year, please feel free to send those ideas to us, and we will get the training scheduled and find the appropriate presenters. Thank you all. Have a great rest of your day.